Well, good afternoon, Nick. We're back from the Labour Party conference. I am absolutely full of a cold, conference flu, cold type thing. How are you feeling?
Well, you see, that's the Labour Party for you. We want to share everything. So, congratulations on having the annual conference socialist cold. I know
Well,
it's I know what you mean. And, equally, I'm still a bit sort of recovering, and of course, you must be doubly exhausted having done both conferences this year, not just the Labour one.
well, I had the problem of actually arriving at the Labour Party conference with a conference cold, having done the Conservative Party conference the week before. I have to say the two conferences were very different in a way that isn't normally the case in most years. I'm sure we can come on to that in a minute, but it's been a little while since we've spoken, and quite a lot has happened in the world of politics with the end of summer recess, by elections, a reshuffle, and all the rest of it.
We were saying, I think, before the summer, um, the next 6 or 8 weeks or so are going to be a fairly quiet time in politics. Well, we turned out to be not very good at reading the rooms, did we? Because an awful lot has happened, as you said. And I guess, well, topically today, we've got a slightly bizarre prospect of an SNP MP defecting to the Conservatives. Now, of all of the political journeys to go on, that feels to me an extremely unusual one. I don't know if you've ever come across anything like that before.
I think you can understand when MPs defect from the Conservatives to Labour or Labour to the Conservatives or even to the Liberal Democrats. You have people on different wings of the party that can have shared issues, and we see a whole load of cross-party working, something that we do an awful lot of. But to defect from one side of the constitutional divide to another does seem pretty extraordinary. I mean, Lisa Cameron is someone we've done a bit of work with before, and she's always been an MP that maybe hasn't been, totally aligned to the leadership of the SNP and has always had some concerns there and has been quite vocal in those concerns. But it does seem an extraordinary defection today, and one that I think has taken the political world by surprise.
And as you say, it's odd crossing that uh, political divide from being an independent campaigner to being a unionist campaigner. And it begs the question, I think, has the SNP lost its way in the debate? And that was a very similar message that was coming out of the Rutherglen by-election, which, of course, only happened very recently, but where there was an absolutely stonking swing from the SNP to Labour. I mean, we talked a bit about the circumstances why that by-election came about, but there was no doubt about it. That by-election looked like it turned the theoretical concept of Labour's recovery in Scotland into a demonstrable recovery in Scotland on the ground. And that isn't just significant in terms of where the independence debate is going, it's significant from a general election point of view as well.
I thought the result in Rutherglen was absolutely extraordinary, and I was struck by Professor John Curtis, the pollster who seems to stand in front of us at general election night and give us the exit poll. Um, he was saying that if this that swing in Rutherglen, yes, it was a by-election swing, but if that was repeated in a general election, you would basically go back to pre-2015 levels of Scottish politics. That Labour would have over 40 seats, around 45 seats, and the SNP would back down to 6, which does seem extraordinary. But it does seem that they're in huge trouble now as a party and are really staring down the prospect of losing an awful lot of seats at the general election.
John
Did
Curtis,
you
he must have run out of expensive words to use by now because he seemed to go through the entire thesaurus in some TV interviews I saw. But I agree. And of course, from a Labour point of view, there's huge caution about making any predictions about what this might mean. But it does look like the party is back in business as a serious player in Scotland now after almost a decade of feeling like it was in decay. And that renewal point for Labour seems to be matched by a point of decay and falling apart, really, for the SNP. They seem to have lost their primary focus. They seem to have lost their kind of united sense of drive. And I think what the SNP are feeling is the absence of Nicola Sturgeon actually as leader, because she was, in my view, one of those people who was able to hold together that coalition for such a long time that the new First Minister just doesn't seem to be able to do anymore.
I was really struck pre the by-election at last week's Tory party conference, speaking to MPs and sort of senior members of the Scottish Conservatives, who had thought that Labour would win the by-election, but probably only by a reasonably small margin. I was talking to a political editor from one of the major news stations who said pretty much the same, that we could expect maybe a narrow win of around 1,000 or 2,000 votes for Labour, which still would have been a remarkable success for the party. But to win by 10,000, nearly 10,000, with almost 60% of the vote, it's a better result than they got even in 2010, when Labour actually did better in Scotland than they'd done in the previous election, despite losing the whole UK-wide general election. Were you surprised by the result? Did you think it would be, using your Labour background, think it would be as good as it was?
Well, the party pull out all of the stops for it. By-elections aren't always an indicator of a wider general election, but a couple of things feel significant here. Firstly, the size of the swing, because I think that the percentage swing is in a way probably more significant than the actual votes cast, because that shows you the direction of travel of people's intention. And I think it felt far more than SNP voters just sitting on their hands. It felt like people actively switching to Labour, and that was certainly the message that was coming back on the ground. So there's a Labour renewal going on at a time when it feels like the other parties are slipping a bit. That's one thing, and then of course there's the wider political implications about this, because politics often is about a sense of momentum and a sense of direction of travel and who's on the up and who's on the down. And what the by-election results confirmed, I think, is that the movement is with Labour, the impetus is with Labour, and the energy is with Labour. We might want to touch on some of that out of the conferences too. And it feels to me as though this is actually not dissimilar to the mid 1990s, when we were at the last few years of a Conservative government, and opposition parties were winning by-elections with more and more significant swings. And that was a sign that the government was finished, really, and it was just a matter of time. And it feels to me as though that's happening over again. And now, I know you're a political nerd, Matthew. Can you think of the last by-election that Labour won in Scotland? Not a by-election that they held, but a by-election that they actually won from a different party, and when it was.
Oh, you are really challenging me now.
I'll
I
put you
was
out of your
going to
misery.
say Perth, but the
It was
SNP
19...
won it, and
No, it was 1964, and the constituency was Rutherglen.
wow.
What a
I
coincidence,
really
eh?
that is
Yeah.
extraordinary. What a coincidence.
So there
So
you
that was the
are.
last time the Labour Party gained a seat in Scotland.
Yes. So that is something for your political pub quiz evening.
Well, I'm looking forward to the questions coming up. It's a shame, because I go to these pub quizzes and it seems like the political questions never actually come up. But one day, fingers
Oh,
crossed.
I know, it's always about sport and music, isn't it? I
I
mean,
know.
nobody's any interest in any of those things. I mean, come on, what we want to know: what was the majority that so and so got in Glenrothes in 1956, within the nearest 500? Anyway, we were talking about the energy being with Labour, and I have to say that, I was saying about the mid 1990s. I am old enough to remember what it was like in the mid 1990s, and going to Labour Party conferences in 1995 and 1996, when there was that similar energy about the Labour Party, and a growing expectation that the party was moving towards power. And I also thought we saw that in some of the protests, actually, because the closer that Labour gets to power, the more people treat it seriously, and the more people in the hard left of the party cry betrayal before Labour's even had a chance to do anything, which is a fairly familiar motif. Does that feel like how it was from your point of view, seeing both the party conferences?
I felt that the Labour Party conference, it was extraordinary, and I was there last year for the first time in 2022, and it felt very, very different to last year. It felt far more business had really arrived. Last year, people were starting to take notice. They were starting to take their Labour engagement more seriously. But really, this year, it felt like business has arrived. And I was struck when we were talking with Roy Kennedy on Saturday night, which feels like an age ago now, but it was only a few days. That he was saying that there'd been 20,000 conference passes issued, which is pretty extraordinary. Compare that to the 13,000 at the Conservative conference the week before. If you want my observation, I think it felt like a Conservative Party conference when they're on the up. It felt like business was there in force. You saw more business there than you did with party members. I saw that Labour published some figures to say that business numbers were 28% of the total attendees compared to 24% of regular party members. Now, I think that just meant that there were more businesses coming rather than less members, but it felt like a party where there was excitement. People were keen to engage and really pleased to see that shadow ministers and MPs from, backbench MPs were actually keen to engage. And actually, we saw that with all of our events as well. We had some fantastic events, whether it was Florence Eshelomi, the Shadow Democracy Minister, whether it was Abena Opongasare, the Shadow Women's Health Minister, who we did an event with earlier this week. It was one of our first events, or Ruth Cadbury as well, and many others. I think it was really good to see that engagement, that business has arrived and the Labour Party is keen to speak to them. And I think regardless of your politics, people welcome that, because it is that engagement that helps form better policies at the end of the day.
There's definitely professionalism there that hasn't always been there at Labour Party conferences in previous years. And, I've been to Labour Party conferences where people have basically banged on about the evils of big business and corporate world and so on. And the mood in the conversations that we were having felt very different, didn't they? They felt much more productive, much more focused on issues like how do we fix the skills gap challenges that our country faces for the future? How can we get the right infrastructure in place to allow the economy to grow? What does that mean in terms of approaches in the regions? And how do we connect our regions more collectively? How do we invest in young people? How do we encourage a spirit of entrepreneurship in a way that isn't just about people exploiting others, but is about respectful of society and the wider environment? And all of these conversations, I think, felt like they were partnership conversations between Labour representatives, business representatives, young people, trade unionists. And I thought the quality of the content that we discussed in all of our sessions, and we covered so many issues over the 3 or 4 days we were there in Liverpool, was really, really good. Lots of rich information there about ideas, thoughts that we need to be thinking about how we feed that into Labour's policy processes.
So, Nick, we did, I think, 12 events at the Labour Party conference. They all went by so quickly, but I think you did 9 of those 12. What was your favourite discussion? Where do you think we had the best engagement
Yes,
from
so.
shadow ministers and MPs?
To be honest, I've lost count because what it's like after about day 2 of conference. You just enter a little zombie world of your own where you just manage your way through. But no, it was. I thought we had some really interesting contributions and also offers of help, and that's again really interesting and exciting for Labour. The fact that people are identifying how their organisation or their charity or their interest group can align with a bigger political agenda. And there was no doubt that Keir's speech, when it was eventually delivered in the hall, got a pretty rapturous reception from the party and had pretty good feedback consistently across the commentariat as well, I think.
Well, the question on his speech, of course, is have you purchased your Sparkle with Starmer t-shirt yet? Which I saw very quickly went on sale on Tuesday evening, and I thought was a fantastic response to what could have been a disaster in terms of a protester getting onto the stage. And I think it obviously raises some security concerns, but I think the party have played that very, very well.
I've been on stages before that people have stormed, and it is not a nice experience. Particularly if you're about to give a speech in front of us, it really matters, and you're sort of really focusing on it. And then to have something like that happen and not knowing what's happening, it certainly when it happened to me, it really shook me. And I thought Keir's composed response, the way that he just took his jacket off, deliberately rolled his sleeves up, and then made that point about Labour as a party of power, not protest. I don't think he could have handled it any better in terms of the response, because he must have had an impact on him personally, but he just was determined to get on with the speech and deliver it. And that, for me, was in a way, almost as much as the content of the speech, a sort of mark of the leadership that Keir's shown over the last few years. Because let's not forget, 3.5 years ago, some of us were asking, did the Labour Party have a future? And look at it now.
I think as well, if you think about the way that the party has changed over the last couple of years, in 2021, which was 2 years ago, it was his first in-person conference speech. The entire speech was dominated by slow hand clapping, protesters, people getting up and really screaming at him in the audience. That was the only interruption in his speech, one protester. And that is quite remarkable for things to have changed as dramatically as they have.
And I fully expected there to be some kind of protest when he mentioned Israel, because we knew he was going to have to mention the awful attack on Israel. And I was a bit disturbed to see some people handing out Palestinian lanyards at a time of great sensitivity. And I thought that was very insensitive to be doing that inside the conference venue. And I fully expected there to be some kind of protest over that. But actually, the Keir's words on Israel and announced, saying that Israel must have the right to defend herself, I think got the biggest line of applause of anything in his speech. And that tells you how much he has changed the Labour Party. I remember Keir saying to the first NEC meeting after he was elected that his first challenge was to root out anti-Semitism. And that reception from that line in the speech, for me, was the indication. Of course, it's never completely done, but he's won that battle loud and clearly, very firmly, and is now absolutely in charge of the party.
So we've said how we've had great engagement at the conference. We've had lots of shadow ministers and MPs and metro mayors as well doing our panels. And also parliamentary candidates, which I think is really important because a lot of these candidates are very likely to be MPs fairly soon. One of the things I wanted to touch on is what next. We might have another party conference before the general election. We might not, but how can organisations best, if they haven't engaged at conference, how can they best take that forward and continue engaging, continue helping shape that policy agenda before the next election?
Well, and you and I were discussing this before the conference season kicked off, and we know that, certainly from a Labour point of view, now that the Labour's conference is over, the conference will have agreed the content and broadly the shape of the manifesto around the 5 missions that Keir announced. So we know that those are going to be the main pillars and themes of the manifesto. And we were saying this, what we wanted to do was use some of our events at conference this year to test out some of those issues, which is exactly what we did. So we talked about skills, infrastructure, creating opportunity, investing in health and social care staff, the workforce, those kind of issues, which aligns very clearly with Labour's 5 missions. And we had great engagement from Purpose Coalition members, and we had some fantastic speakers from across the board. Many universities wanting to position themselves in terms of economic drivers as well as just places of excellent learning, translating that research that our universities are doing, which is of such consistently high quality, into economic opportunity for people, creating jobs that help people from a whole range of backgrounds get on and progress, tackling social mobility consistently at a place, working in partnership with other organisations. So some great contributions from our Purpose members. So I think the next task is to start putting this together more consistently, where there's a series of issues in policy terms that Labour is interested in, wants to discuss further, and where we have something to offer, and where our coalition members really feel that their expertise will be valued and appreciated. And I think some roundtables, some conversations, ultimately these policy papers that we can say, not from a manifesto point of view, here are some demands from us, but here are some suggestions of ways in which we can help you deliver on your agenda more quickly, Labour. I think that's probably the next stage of our work over the next 6 months or so.
And of course, there's plenty of opportunities for Purpose Coalition members to be doing that, because in a couple of weeks' time, you're chairing a roundtable with Helen Hayes, the Shadow Children's and Early Years Minister, who I think is a real star of the party and is someone that will go very far. I saw actually at conference John McTernan, the sort of Labour commentator, who was really tipping her for big things. We've got a roundtable on the future of social mobility and digital and tech that you're obviously also chairing, with Alex Davies-Jones, another star. And actually, I heard one of our Purpose Coalition members the other day saying how well she handled detailed policy questions, on from experts in the tech sector, which is not an easy thing to do when you're a shadow minister and you've got so many competing pressures without a big team of civil servants around you. And also our event with the Shadow Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Tulip Sadiq, on flexible working, and there's a whole range of that's just a couple of the different things that we've got coming up over the next few months, and we really will be a good opportunity to start continue conveying those messages.
I know our members, organisations which don't take a particular political stance, and that's, of course, we're not asking them to, but in the context of where we are as a country, in the context of the sense that we need a whole-scale programme of renewal across public life, civic life, society, infrastructure, uh, government, that there's a whole lot of stuff for us to do. And if we don't have a clear focus, then people will want to do things but get frustrated that they can't find a way in. And so our job, I think, is to link the ambition of our members to make a change, because that comes through loud and clear, not satisfied with the status quo, wanting to make a difference. That's what drives them to be members in the first place. And we need to put that alongside Labour and make sure that there's a way of showing the opportunities to work together. That isn't about political support, because of course our Purpose Coalition members will work with any government. But if Labour is where the energy and momentum is, and the Purpose Coalition is where the ideas and sense of what can be done is, then it would be a mistake not to put the two together and make the most of it for the interests of the country.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. Well, Nick, it's been great to chat today. I am going to go for a Lemsip and try and recover from this conference flu before we get back into it. But
Oh dear me. Well, at least you haven't got to go to the SNP one next week, which
well, given today's news, I suspect it'll be a fairly eventful
I feel like
conference. But
well, who knows? Who knows? Might be throwing things other than just glitter.
well, we'll find out
Um,
when Hamza Yusuf takes to the stage on Sunday. But great to chat, and
yes.
thanks for listening.
Well, and thanks again, Matthew, for all of your help at conference. And I think the fact that the Purpose Coalition did so many events and got such great attendance at them shows that our influence has significantly grown within Labour circles over the last year. And very much looking forward to the next 6 months, where we turn all of that policy discussion into a more realistic programme for what a government could help us to deliver.
Well,
So,
I look forward to it.
plenty to discuss in the future. So I'll see you next week.
See you next week.